Atlanta, Georgia. An early spring day. Golden sunlight danced through the tall glass windows of the Children's Hospital of Atlanta, where Danielle Brooks sat in a pale blue cushioned chair beside the hospital bed. Next to her was her husband, Michael Reynolds, a man whose eyes always made her feel safe. Hand in hand, their hearts beat a little faster, not just from the anticipation of the moment, but from the miracle quietly unfolding between them. A new life, growing inside Danielle. The doctor had just left the room, still smiling. "Congratulations, you two. Danielle is pregnant. Everything looks great. The pregnancy is stable, and all her numbers are strong." For a moment, both Danielle and Michael sat frozen, and then their eyes met, wide and bright with joy. Danielle brought a hand to her mouth, then suddenly let out a laugh, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd get to be a mom again. Not after everything." Michael gently squeezed her hand, his gaze so tender it made her heart flutter. "You're not just going to be a mom, Danielle. You're the best thing that's ever happened to both me and my daughter." Danielle leaned into his shoulder, and in that quiet moment, the old wounds seemed to fade into the background. They had made it through lonely nights, broken marriages, and the pain of disappointment in themselves. And now, life was opening into a new chapter, filled with hope, filled with love. What they didn't know was that joy like this wouldn't come without complications. Dinner that evening took place in their small kitchen, where the warm yellow light cast a cozy glow over the old round wooden table they had used for the past 3 years. 4 chairs sat in their usual spots, just like every night. Danielle and Michael seated across from the 2 kids. They were a family, yes, but each of them carried something personal. Memories, losses, and quiet emotional boundaries that outsiders couldn't see. Lucas, Danielle's son, had grown up in the arms of a single mother for nearly 5 years before Michael entered their lives. He was playful and energetic, but often selfish, probably because he'd never had to share his mom with anyone before. Mary, on the other hand, was the opposite. The quiet 12-year-old was Michael's daughter from his first marriage. His late wife had passed away from cancer. Mary was introspective, reserved. Danielle had tried again and again to get closer to her, but she never really knew what Mary was thinking. Tonight, they gathered as usual, around the tomato stew Danielle had spent the afternoon making, but only she and Michael knew. This dinner would mark a turning point. Michael glanced at the kids, his voice calm and kind. "We have something special to tell you." Danielle smiled, her eyes shimmering. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a new baby." Lucas stopped clinking his fork against his plate and looked up at his mom. His big eyes blinked, confused at first, then slowly scrunched into a frown. "A baby? Does that mean I have to share my superhero collection with some snot-nosed little kid?" Lucas turned to Michael, frowning. "So, are you still gonna take me to the baseball game on Saturday? Or are you just gonna be holding the baby all the time?" Danielle hesitated for a beat. She could see it, that small flicker of fear in her son's eyes, the quiet panic of being replaced. He had always seen Michael as the only dad he'd ever known, but now it seemed that role was under threat. Mary didn't look up. She calmly continued cutting her meat into small pieces. A moment later, she finally spoke. "You might want to think about getting a bigger table. This one's too small if we're going to be 5. No sarcasm, no resentment, just a simple, detached observation. Danielle turned to look at the girl, like always, trying to read her face. But Mary gave away nothing. The rhythm of dinner broke down after that. Lucas went back to mumbling under his breath. Mary stayed completely silent. Michael and Danielle exchanged glances, doing their best to hide the quiet sting of disappointment. Less than 10 minutes later, Mary excused herself to go study. Lucas didn't finish his dinner either. He pushed his chair back with a sigh and walked away. Danielle stared at the 2 empty chairs, letting out a quiet breath. Her heart felt like that old wooden table, small, unsteady, and unsure if there would be enough room for everyone. That night, the house fell into silence. Danielle lay on her side, back turned toward her husband, one hand resting over her stomach almost unconsciously. "I thought the kids would be happy," she said, voice cracking. "I thought having a baby would bring us closer, but maybe it just made it clearer how hurt they already are." Michael reached over and wrapped his arms around her. "We're trying, Danielle. We really are. Lucas is scared you're going to stop loving him. And Mary, I don't even know what she's thinking anymore. I've tried, Michael, but I'm still just Dad's new wife in her eyes. I don't want to be the woman who came after and ended up hurting your daughter." Michael pulled her in tighter. "Just like I don't want to be the man who hurts your son. But you know what? The fact that we care so much, that we're trying, that's what's going to make them feel safe. That's what will matter in the long run." Danielle said nothing. Her husband's words wrapped around her like a warm blanket over all the uncertainty. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, at least tonight, she wasn't alone in this journey of becoming a mother again. The next day, a windless afternoon, sunlight casting a soft, lazy golden hue over the kitchen. Danielle stood at the sink, wiping glass after glass, though her mind drifted far away, tangled in the sighs of the night before. Lucas was napping after a long morning playing in the yard. Michael had left early for the construction site. The house now held only 2 women, and the long stretch of silence neither had dared to cross. Danielle quietly walked upstairs, carrying a stack of fresh towels for the bathroom. As she passed Mary's room, she noticed something unusual. The door was slightly ajar. Mary almost always kept it closed. From inside came the faint sound of music, a piano piece slow and uneven, drifting out from a small radio. She knocked gently. "Mary? I'm just bringing up clean towels." No answer. Danielle pushed the door open a little more. Mary wasn't there. The room was neat, carefully arranged, just like always. She placed the towels on the chair and was about to leave when her eyes caught a small notebook left open on the desk, the pages wide like someone had been writing and left in a hurry, forgetting to close it. She hadn't meant to read it, but a single line stood out and stopped her heart. "Mom, I miss you. I'm scared that if I start loving Danielle as a mom, I might forget you." Danielle stood frozen. It was Mary's handwriting, careful, neat, yet filled with quiet conflict. Each line looked like it was struggling with itself. Danielle didn't dare turn the page. She couldn't move. Her eyes fell on a few more words just below. "But having a little brother like Lucas isn't so bad. He's loud but kind of funny, and sometimes it feels okay to have someone in the house call my name, instead of all that silence." Danielle gently closed the notebook, placing it back exactly as it was. Her hand still trembled. She stepped backward out of the room and pulled the door shut, softly, as if she had never been there. Back in the kitchen, she sat down at the table, her heart in a knot. Mary didn't hate her. Mary was just scared. The girl was holding on to the memory of her late mother so tightly, and in her mind, opening up to a stepmother felt like a betrayal. Danielle felt her nose sting, the way it does right before tears come. Not because she felt rejected, but because, for the first time, she truly understood the depth of Mary's loneliness, a loneliness even an adult might never have imagined. That night, Danielle didn't say a word to Michael about the notebook. But when the family sat together watching the news, the way she looked at Mary had changed. It wasn't guarded or tense anymore. It was soft and full of quiet understanding. She knew you couldn't force someone to open their heart, but at the very least, from now on, she could choose to move forward with more compassion than ever before. 2 days later, the backyard was filled with the clatter of metal. Lucas, the energetic 6-year-old, was crouched down, his face flushed red as he struggled with his bike's slipped chain. Michael stepped outside, a glass of water in hand. He was about to hand it to his son when he paused, noticing Lucas awkwardly jabbing at the wheel with an old screwdriver. "Hey, bud, let me help." "You'll need pliers for that," he said gently, setting the glass down on the porch step. But Lucas shook his head, lips pressed tight. "I can do it myself." "I can show you. I don't need help." This time his voice was louder, Not quite angry, more like afraid of being interrupted. He hunched over again, tugging at the chain with trembling fingers, using more force than he should. Michael stepped back and sat on the porch, watching silently. Something inside him stirred. Something offbeat, like the first time he took Lucas to the park and the boy had asked, "If I were your real son, would you yell at me?" That evening, while Danielle was tidying up the kitchen, Michael walked in and sat at the dining table. His voice dropped to a thoughtful tone. "Lucas fixed his bike today. Wouldn't let me help. Told me he wants to learn to do everything on his own." Danielle paused, looking up, a flicker of surprise on her face. "That's odd. He usually loves asking you for help." Michael nodded. "I think he's scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared that once the baby comes, I won't have time for him anymore. That I'll lose patience. That I won't love him the same." Danielle leaned against the counter, clutching the dish towel in her hand. "I've thought about that too. Lucas has always been the baby of the family. I used to be his whole world, and now maybe he feels like he's being replaced." She stepped closer, resting her hand gently on his. "Michael, you're a wonderful father." He gave a small nod, eyes soft under the warm kitchen light. "I won't let him feel left behind, I promise." Danielle didn't say anything more, but something inside her eased. A small flicker of warmth broke through the fog of worry. Maybe things weren't perfect, but maybe they were slowly finding each other through imperfect but honest love. Mary's birthday came on a clear Saturday afternoon. Danielle had been up since early morning, spending the entire morning in the kitchen. She decided to make an apple pie. She'd asked Michael a few days before, "What kind of cake does she like?" He paused, thoughtful, before answering softly, "Back then, Mary's mom used to bake cinnamon apple pie for her every birthday. After she passed, I bought apple pies from different bakeries, but Mary always said they didn't taste right. I don't want you to feel awkward about it." Danielle simply shook her head. "Trust me, my apple pie is something special. I think she'll like it." The pie came out right on time, golden brown, its crust perfectly crisp. The warm aroma of apples and cinnamon filled the kitchen, rich enough to lure Lucas in 3 times just to ask, "Mom, can I get a bite too?" Danielle chuckled and patted his shoulder. "Tonight is your sister Mary's birthday. Try to be a gentleman, all right?" By dinner time, the whole family gathered around the table. Mary sat between Michael and Lucas, across from Danielle. On the table were honey-roasted chicken, asparagus salad, chilled apple juice, and the apple pie placed right in the center, like a crown jewel of the evening. When it came time for dessert, Danielle began slicing the pie, carefully placing pieces onto each plate. She smiled gently and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." Mary stared at the slice in front of her. Silent. Then, slowly, she picked up her fork, cut a small piece, and brought it to her mouth. What happened next caught everyone by surprise. Mary's eyes widened, glistening with sudden tears. Her hand froze midair. Michael leaned toward her, concerned. "Mary? Are you okay?" Mary set her plate down. Her lips trembled. "This pie?" Danielle instinctively held her breath. "It tastes just like Mom's," Mary whispered. Then, without another word, without looking at anyone, she placed her fork gently on the table, pushed back her chair, and stood up. "I'm full. Excuse me." Her voice cracked. She walked quickly up the stairs, and a moment later, the door slammed shut. The sound of the lock clicking echoed through the dining room like a heart quietly closing. Danielle sat frozen, stunned. The warmth of the celebration seemed to vanish in an instant. She stared at the empty chair, then turned to Michael, her voice trembling. "Did I do something wrong? I didn't mean to make her uncomfortable." Lucas, unsure of what had just happened, quietly slipped into the living room, leaving the table silent. Michael took a bite of the pie. He chewed slowly, then fell quiet for a few seconds. Finally, he looked at Danielle. "That pie, what recipe did you use?" Danielle blinked, caught off guard. She took a moment to gather herself. "It was from a woman I met at the hospital 5 years ago, back when I was being treated for ovarian tumors." She swallowed hard. "At the time, I was hopeless. I thought I'd never be able to have another child besides Lucas. Michael gently squeezed her hand. Who was that woman? Her name was Rachel, Danielle replied, voice soft. I never knew her last name. One day, I was crying in the hospital garden. She came over, sat with me, and comforted me. We started talking, and kept talking. She became a friend, a real one. Danielle's gaze drifted as her voice lowered. She told me she had a 6-year-old daughter. She felt terrible because, for the first time, she couldn't bake an apple pie for her little girl's birthday. Her health was getting worse, and she knew. Michael didn't say a word. Danielle continued, My surgery went well. I was lucky. They only had to remove one ovary, and the doctor said I could still have children. On the day I was discharged, Rachel gave me her apple pie recipe. She said, Keep baking sweet things for our kids, will you? That was the last time I saw her. Michael slowly stood up, left the room, and returned a few minutes later with a dusty photo album. He opened it to a familiar page and turned it toward Danielle. She looked down and froze. There, in a photo surrounded by soft smiles and summer light, was the same woman. Rachel. Danielle's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled. That's her? Michael nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel was my wife, Mary's mother. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Only the wind outside could be heard, brushing past the porch like a deep sigh from fate itself. They both knew this wasn't random. None of it was. That night, as the house fell into a hush, Danielle suddenly clutched her belly, her face drained of color. The pain hit without warning, sharp, cramping. Michael panicked. He scooped her into his arms and rushed to the car, calling the hospital as he sped through the quiet streets. In the emergency room, the doctor came out after the examination. The baby is safe, thankfully. We caught it early, but this was brought on by prolonged stress affecting the uterus. We strongly recommend that the patient avoid emotional strain and prioritize rest. Danielle lay on the hospital bed, her eyes fixed on the sterile white ceiling. Inside her swirled a mess of emotions, guilt, fear, and a crushing disappointment in herself. Michael sat by her side, holding her hand gently. He whispered, You don't have to force yourself to be the perfect mom. You just need to be you. Danielle shook her head, her voice barely a breath. I don't know if I can. Mary, I just can't reach her. I don't understand her. Michael hesitated for a moment, then said softly, Mary wants to see you. Just the two of you. Danielle blinked, surprised. Right now? He nodded. She said there's something she needs to say, something only you can hear. Mary stepped into the hospital room, a little hesitant. She clutched a neatly folded white handkerchief in her hand. Danielle sat up, propping herself against the pillows. She smiled, trying to keep her voice calm. Hi, sweetheart. Mary walked over and sat in the chair beside the bed. It took her a moment before she finally spoke. She said softly, I'm sorry. For walking out earlier, it's just that pie. It made me miss my mom so much. Danielle nodded gently. I understand. Mary lowered her head, her voice barely a whisper. I was scared that if I liked your pie, if I started to call you Mom, my real mom would be sad. I thought I'd be betraying her. Danielle reached out and held Mary's small, trembling hands in hers. Your mom never wanted you to live with that fear, she said, her voice full of warmth. She once told me she hoped that someday someone else would come along and love her little girl in all the ways she couldn't anymore. Mary looked up, her eyes glassy. I don't want you to replace her, but I don't want to hate you either. Danielle's throat tightened as she pulled the girl into her arms. You don't have to choose, Mary. You can love us both. There's room in your heart for two moms. I'm not here to take anyone's place. I just want to love you with all the heart I have. A few days later, Danielle was discharged from the hospital. On the ride home, Lucas wrapped his arms around her tightly in the back seat and whispered, If you have to go to the hospital again, can I sleep there with you? That night, in the cozy kitchen, the four of them sat around the table. The old round table had been moved to the storage room, replaced by a longer one, big enough for 5. Michael poured water into the glasses and joked, "At this rate, once the baby grows a little, even this table will feel small." Lucas grinned. "I'll give up the middle seat, but I still get to be the big brother, right?" Mary nodded. "Yeah, just make sure the big brother doesn't wet the bed. That'd be embarrassing." Laughter filled the room. Danielle looked up at them all, her heart quietly blooming. Some families aren't born from blood, but built from choices, choosing to stay, to understand, to love each other despite the differences. Love doesn't have to be perfect. It only needs to be true enough to help wounded hearts believe in it again. And sometimes, the ones who come after aren't replacements for the past. They're the gentle continuation of something beautiful that was never really lost.